As the trade deadline fast approaches, there are more and more rumors around the San Antonio Spurs, including an article from The Athletic linking Brandon Ingram there. But we also have to note something that Brian Windhorst said that also has big implications on the Spurs and the trades and the season moving forward. Got to dive into all this stuff and how it could change everything for the Spurs on this episode of Spurs Digest. But quick reminder, guys, we're approaching the trade deadline. We got videos covering all the latest Spurs topics around this deadline, and 75% of you haven't hit this free subscribe button down below. Stay up to date on all the latest Spurs news on YouTube. This is your spot to be. Let's dive right into the video. And I want to start with an article from The Athletic that I will link below that you can go have a look at that talks about the Pelicans at the NBA trade deadline. It's by William Geary, and he's one of the Pelicans writers at The Athletic. And he's been talking a bit about Brandon Ingram. Now, we know Brandon Ingram before. We've talked about him, and we've talked about him to the Spurs. We've seen what he's done this season for the Pelicans, but the Pelicans are in a rough spot. I mean, let's just take a look at his stats. I mean, 22 points a game, 6 rebounds, 5 assists. The efficiency is solid, not super amazing, but the Pelicans are, look, it's rough. I mean, Murray's now out for the season, tore his Achilles, and Ingram is, well, his numbers have dipped a bit over the last little while, and he's an unrestricted free agent after this season, which has a lot of people speculating that he will be moved. And you also see that Trey Murphy has been balling out for them, averaging almost 40 a game, I think, over certain stretches this season. So it's like, you know, Ingram could very well be moved. And in this article at The Athletic, he actually mentions the Spurs as one of the main teams that could go for Brandon Ingram, involving Keldon Johnson, Harrison Barnes, and a 2025 first-round pick in exchange for Ingram and Daniel Tice. My boy Daniel Tice. Love him. Anyway, he'd actually be not a bad backup center for Wemby, just saying, but he said this would be aggressive from the Spurs after already trading for De'Aaron Fox, as we know. But Fox, Ingram, and Wembanyama have the potential to form one of the most formidable big threes in the Western Conference. And I tend to agree. I actually think that in a vacuum, these three players fit together extremely well. I think Victor Wembanyama can fit with pretty much everyone, but a slashing guard who can play make like De'Aaron Fox, and a Brandon Ingram who can create his own shot if needed and still shoot the three ball at a reasonable clip. It's a really nice trio, and the defense isn't super lacking. Wemby is obviously the elite defender there. Fox is not amazing, can gamble for some steals. Ingram is meh, but he's long, right? So I think this trio does make sense. However, I don't see the Spurs doing this. Like, look, it's a cheap deal, a 2025 first-round pick. Now, it depends. I think they're saying the Spurs' own pick this year, but, you know, from the Spurs' view, he says adding Ingram works in a vacuum. Spurs acting coach Mitch Johnson would certainly use him around Wembanyama, even after acquiring Fox, but I'm not sure it's worth losing Barnes' shooting and versatility, even if you could stomach Keldon Johnson's departure. And that's kind of where I'm stuck, right? Because if we're talking Brandon Ingram here, like, I'm not convinced that he moves the needle very much compared to having the depth of Harrison Barnes and Keldon Johnson at the 3 spot. Maybe that's a hot take. Obviously, Ingram is better than either of those two players, and when you get a star player, like, look, say Wemby and Fox have an off night, having your tertiary scoring option being Brandon Ingram is absolutely unbelievable, right? And you still have Devin Vassell who can score too. The scoring would no longer be an issue for the Spurs. But this dude's an unrestricted free agent after this year, and he's going to demand a very solid contract. Here's my question to you guys, and I want you guys to leave some comments down below. See if you're on board with me, because this is where I'm really getting stuck on this trade. Why would the Spurs give up their own 2025 pick in this trade for an unrestricted free agent that's going to command a ton of money? That's where I'm stuck on this. Not to mention that, like, look, in a vacuum, again, Ingram for Tice, or Ingram for Barnes and Johnson is like, okay, kind of makes some sense. You're upgrading your 3 position. But longer term, I don't think it makes a ton of sense. Now, he does go on to say that Keldon Johnson, Harrison Barnes, one of them is probably going to be shipped off by this summer anyway, because they're combined making about $37 million. So to free up some space for the Spurs to make another move, whether it be a free agency signing or going out and making another trade, like, you're probably going to have to move one of these guys eventually. But trading them for an unrestricted free agent who has not looked at his best this year, yes, you'd be bringing him into a good situation, but I'm not sold on this. Let me know your thoughts down below, especially giving up that first-round pick. I know it's ours, and we still have the Hawks this year, the Hawks pick, so, you know, like, it's not the end of the world. The Spurs are clearly comfortable moving picks, but to me, this is not the right fit. You might as well try and just sign him at this point, right? I don't think there's a need to go for him this year unless he's going to extend for some, like, cheap contract. Like, if you can get Brandon Ingram at, like, $25-30 million for a bunch of years, sure. That's not going to happen, though. However, we got to dive into something else in this Brandon Ingram front, because his name has been at the forefront of trade rumors for a while now, pretty much, well, a good chunk of this season. We've made a few videos on it, but I want to dive into something Brian Windhorst recently said. Have a look at this. As we bring this up, he said specifically, keep an eye on the Atlanta Hawks. This was just a few days ago. I think it was on Get Up. They just lost their star wing, Keldon Johnson, for the season. They may start to get interested in making a move, especially for Brandon Ingram. Keep an eye on that. Now, the reason I bring this up is because the Hawks have been all around these trade rumors. We're talking about, a bunch of different things because of their season going down in a spiral. But there's a very good point here. The Atlanta Hawks, because of their original trade with the Spurs for Murray, they don't have power over their first round pick in 25, 26, or 27, right? The Spurs kind of control all that stuff. The first round pick's unprotected to the Spurs in 25 and 27. The Spurs have a swap in 26. Atlanta's in a bad spot. They cannot afford to tank to the bottom of the standings like they're doing right now. They did win their last game, but they were on a losing streak before that. They might go down past the Bulls, which would be amazing for the Spurs in I guess not really anymore, because we gave that pick back to the Bulls in that Fox trade. Sort of forgot that. Good for the Bulls anyway. But yeah, they're falling down the standings right now. So the further that pick falls, the better it is for the Spurs, the worse it is for the Hawks, because you're not getting that development and you can't afford to really rebuild. You don't have control. If you're a bad team, you're not going to get the picks that matter to you. If they tank, they fall down to 12th, 13th in the standings. They don't have their own pick this year. They don't have it next year. They don't have it in 2027. So going and making a move for a guy like Brandon Ingram, like Brian Windhorst said there on Get Up just a few days ago, that could make some sense. Now, again, if you're pursuing a trade like this, you're assuming that you'd want to keep Ingram around maybe for a little while longer. I'm not sure why the Hawks would be having an eye on him, but there's multiple reports, like I just showed you, that the Hawks are somewhat interested in going after Brandon Ingram. It would be a temporary solution this year to just try and hopefully make the playoffs, get some more experience, keep Tre Young in there. DeAndre Hunter's doing fine. There's been all these Capella talks as well. It would boost him a little bit, but I don't think Ingram is much better than Keldon Johnson, especially looking towards the future. And so if the Hawks are really in this kind of talk right now, I think this could be even good for the Spurs. I see a world where Brandon Ingram gets traded to the Atlanta Hawks and they actually don't get any better, and it kind of just collapses a little bit, right? If they have to give up assets for Brandon Ingram, and then Ingram just walks after the season because he sees, well, Keldon Johnson might be ahead of me on the depth chart next year. I mean, they could play together for sure. I mean, Johnson could play the 3 or 4. I guess that's fair. So maybe they could play together. But whatever. If Ingram's like, look, I'm going to get fewer shots as I'm hitting my prime, I want a ton of money. Atlanta's like, no, I don't want to re-sign you for that much money. This could lead to something bad for the Hawks. And again, I think they have some good young players. And a move like this would just be a temporary fix. But if they are desperate, like the report says, this is huge for the Spurs, because no matter what happens, this year we're getting that pick. If they decide to try and be better, that's fine. That pick maybe doesn't end up being top 5. Top 5 is maybe a stretch anyway, but maybe it doesn't end up being top 8 or 9. Maybe it's 10th or 11th. Fine. Spurs still have their own pick and the next 2 years, and making a trade for Brandon Ingram, I think, is a very short-sighted move if the Hawks were to do it. So I'm actually very excited by all these Brandon Ingram rumors, whether it's to the Spurs or to the Hawks. I think there could be some big implications for San Antonio moving forward. This changes a lot for the way we're looking at the Spurs right now. Let me know your thoughts on all this Ingram stuff down below. I'd love to hear from you. That'll do it for this episode of Spurs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel, guys. We are pushing 5,000 subscribers. It's a huge milestone. So if you've made it almost 9 minutes into this video, you enjoyed the content, you want to stay up to date on the Spurs, hit the free subscribe button down below. You won't regret it. I promise. I've been your host, Josh Gosse, and I'll catch you in the next one.